Legible AI collaboration, crafting AI-assisted specs and code with provenance that reviewers can fully understand. Really, all we're talking about is plays nice with others. This is the story about how even when you're using AI code gen, you can establish rhythms and routines with your teammates that makes that AI generated code more legible, more understandable, more shareable. And even for folks here that are working solo, I promise we'll get to it, but we'll have a whole part where we talk a little bit about collaborating with yourself, because future you is almost like another teammate, and future you will appreciate being able to understand all the decisions, all the why, all the intent that went into the code that you generated. And so I've got a set of slides we'll walk through, mostly driven by the process that we use at SpecStory, or the processes we use at SpecStory, to make sure that we play nice with each other. But also we'll dig in. There's some templates that you can use for slash commands for Claude Code, or they can be repurposed as skills. I'll show you some real practice around viewing transcripts side by side with code to help you get at that provenance and that understanding of what somebody was trying to do. We'll get hands-on too. But just sort of taking a step back, I mean, we talk about reviews a lot at SpecStory, and there are a lot of different types of reviews that we talk about, but we go all the way back to the fundamental question, like why even review? Like, why do we review each other's code? What are we looking for when we review AI generated code? When does it make sense to review code? When does it make sense to review intent but not code? And the short answer is it depends. And it comes down to two major things that we're trying to do when we build software. One is to build the right thing. One is to build the thing right. And so build the right thing, like, are we even on the trail? Are we even right in terms of feature functionality? Are we on the right path to product market fit? Are we addressing actual customer pain points? Like, are we building the right thing? And we ask that question a lot, I mean, especially as a startup. And so we've come up with the beginning of a methodology around reviews that have nothing to do with code and everything to do with intent. And then, of course, building the thing right. Like, do we believe that the thing that we've built can stand up to lots of different environments? Does the SpecStory extension work fine when you're using it on Windows and you're remotely SSHing to a dev server that's running Linux, right? Like, there are lots of cases where we need to build the thing right too. And that's where code review comes in. And it's not black or white, it's sort of a scale between these. And we'll talk about a bunch of different scenarios where we use one or the other or both. One other fundamental question we ask ourselves a lot is, like, why review? Like, what is it that we're trying to get out of intent reviews or code reviews? And I think something that's always been the case is that knowledge sharing is the reason we do reviews. We have, even before AI code gen, used code reviews as a way to build shared mental models among teammates. It's a way also to preserve, if you're using a PR, for example, it's a way to preserve your thinking at the time that you made the set of changes. And tangentially, of course, it's about code styling, code correctness. I mean, often when we talk about code reviews, those are the things that we talk about the most. But if you really dig in to the value to a team of code reviews, those are a small part of the value. The biggest part of the value is closing understanding gaps, making sure context is shared, and in general, making it so that not just one person knows and owns the running software, but the entire team can know and own the running software. And so that part needs to get preserved. Even as AI is generating more and more code, we still need shared knowledge and we still need shared mental models. And so the problem is just that code review as the sole mechanism for creating those shared mental models is just breaking down. I mean, the traditional process that we use to code review every line of code is no longer tenable with the amount of code that's being generated. So we just need to find a new process or new approach to get that knowledge sharing across. And so we'll walk through I mean, this is a high level, the steps of process that we use, but we modify it for any given task, any given feature, functionality, piece of software that we're building to make sure we're using it appropriately as opposed to blindly walking through every single step of the process. One of the things that maybe will stand out as unique is how we do intent reviews. Like what we mean by intent reviews, they're a lot closer to architectural reviews or RFCs or even requirements reviews. But with AI code gen, there are a lot of nice ways that you can do intent reviews these days that are much faster and more efficient. But the overarching process, review intent, implement the thing, maybe optionally do a demo, review the code, and then merge. That's the sort of standard process. We tweak it pretty heavily depending on what it is that we're trying to do. And so let's walk through a few patterns, right? So the traditional pattern, the one that essentially uses all of these steps is first, we're going to do intent review in the form of planning. It might be conversational, it might be around a document, it might be around even a prototype that was built in the past. Then there's a gate, and we say, okay, some subset of us are aligned on the intent. Now go forward and implement. That implementation might be iterative. Of course, we use AI code gen for much of that implementation, and then optionally demo along the way, get to a point where we're happy with it, another strong gate, and you do a code review. So issue a pull request, use GitHub, review the code, and then merge it back into main. This is fairly traditional software development approach. We actually use it pretty rarely in this end-to-end way, but I just wanted to lay it out as the path, let's call it the traditional or standard path. And it is still useful, even in the days of AI code gen, for the types of changes that are high risk, right? The types of changes that have to do with security sensitive code, core infrastructure, or when the team needs to deeply understand not just the intent, but the implementation of that intent. And so this I think of as sort of the traditional and standard benchmark. And we can talk about modifications that we make from here. So this pattern, intent review with optimistic implementation, is probably the pattern that we use most often. This ends up being, I call it 60–70% of the way that we build software at SpecStory. And for the most forward-thinking teams that we work with who have pretty heavily embraced agentic coding, they use something similar to this. And I think about it as intent review with optimistic implementation. And we'll get into some details of what this intent review even feels like and looks like and what you're doing during an intent review. But what we do is if we've got a feature that we're about to build, let's say it's the core commenting feature in our new Arena software, we'll put together a thoughtful and thorough design spec, like I'm sure you've gone over in the course many times. And as an individual, you might take that design spec and jump straight into coding with Claude Code or Cursor, any of the agents. And it's sort of just for you and the agent. But the one big thing that we do differently is share that spec, right? We just share it with each other. We'll push it to Git repo. We'll share it on Slack. We'll tap each other on the shoulder and say, can you take a look at this spec doc in the process of implementing it, but it could use eyes on it. And so we do both. It's like a split path, begin the intent review, and at the same time, begin the implementation. And this allows a few things. One, it allows us to move forward unblocked. So it's not a hard gate, which is good, get speed, but it also allows us to inform each other of the parts of the code base that we're working on, which again, any good team will typically do in one way, shape, or form. This is just a way to do it in a form that you and your teammates can use the document for for knowing what each other are working on, but you can also feed those documents into agents so that you can guide an agent to not step on parts of the code base that your colleague is working in right now. And so that's the key part of this process, an intent review shared with each other while at the same time simultaneously doing implementation. And then feedback might come in on that spec document, either directly on the document, in comments, Slack, passing conversation. And of course, like anything, we just course correct as those bits of feedback come in. And in the worst case, if somebody finds a fatal flaw in our intent and our spec, we just toss the whole thing out, right? I mean, code is cheap these days, and we can say, yep, we started down a dead end path. The intent was misaligned from the get-go. It's okay. We'll start a whole new project. We'll try and rewrite a spec doc, share it again, and keep going. Most of the size and scope of work that we're doing that falls into a process like this is, we'd call it a whole feature, like a whole unit of functionality. It typically is something that takes between half a day and 2 days to implement. And so this is generally a fairly tight process. While you're going through that, if you're spending a half a day or a day, you might be sharing demos with each other throughout that implementation cycle. There could just be simple Tela or Loom videos. Maybe if there is a stand-up happening in the middle of implementation, a more traditional demo in a live meeting. But that's another piece of it. And then finally, code review. And this depends again on what it is that we're building. We rarely do a line by line code review, but I will show you some of the tools that we use, including slash commands and some of the built-in skills for doing code reviews in an AI assisted fashion. And then we'll merge. Often that merge looks like a commit straight to main. Again, for the speed that we're going at, we use a lot of trunk-based development. It's very rare that we're branching off. What does this work well for? Well, it works well for the types of things you're building that are very intent heavy, right? Like where the intent is what matters much more than almost anything else. So business logic, major UI features, series feature work where it's less critical to have specificity around the implementation, but is very critical to have a user experience or workflow that's well understood. So this process is the process that we use most often. Just pause and see if there are any questions that this brings up so far, any topics that are coming up.
I don't see any questions in the Discord right now.
Okay.
If you have questions, go to the SpecStory channel or unmute at any point.
Sounds good. Yeah, I just want to make sure I left a break there for a second. We'll keep rolling though. We'll hit the third pattern and then we'll start deep diving in a bit. So our third pattern is the lightest weight of lightweight processes, where we're doing a demo review only. Like we may not do an intent review at all. We're certainly not doing a code review. And specifically when we're prototyping features, when we're trying to generate, we call it like divergent thinking, right? Like we're just trying to explore the problem space and the solution space. We'll just go for it, right? I mean, there's no harm in creating a branch and just beginning an implementation. Again, maybe a prompt-driven implementation, maybe a spec-driven implementation, but it's much more about getting something in terms of a working mock-up or prototype as quickly as possible. And then we align pretty heavily on demo reviews, right? Where we'll share with each other what we've built. Might be a recording, might be a live meeting. And we use that demo to help us come up with the right intent for one of these previous patterns, right? Like the result of a prototype and then demo review is often that you're going to have a much better understanding of the intent behind what it is that you want to build so that you can do a more thoughtful and thorough implementation following one of the other workflows. And then, as I mentioned, this applies not just in a team context, but also as a solo dev, right? If you're using AI code gen, one of the hardest things that we've noticed is that it's very easy to forget the details of everything that you've built. If you've done more traditional software development, you know that the relatively slow pace of traditional software development, plus the fact that you agonized over each line of code, typically means it's burned into your memory a lot more strongly than it is when you're using agentic coding approaches. And so when we use agents, we try to find other ways to burn these decisions and implementation into our memory. And one of the ways is to do self-reviews. So what does self-review look like? It could be any of the above. It could be an intent review, a demo review, or a code review. And there's just a couple easy ways to do it. One, go away and come back, right? So do your review, either an intent review of a design doc or a code review of some code or a demo review of working software later, like do it hours later, do it the next day. And especially if you combine that with switching context. So switching context meaning you might physically switch context. That actually does help get you into a different mindset. But more often or more frequently, switching agent context, right? So either starting a completely new session with the existing agent or even bringing a second agent to bear and using that clean context to put fresh eyes onto what you just built, either reviewing your design document in the context of your code base with no other context that was used for creating the design doc, or reviewing the code that was produced, which we'll take a look at in a second, or helping you as you manually review and sort of smoke test or do what we're calling demo review of the implemented feature. And then the other approach also to do solo reviews would be code archaeology or software archaeology, meaning intentionally revisit a feature that you implemented weeks or months ago. Usually this is obviously spurred because something happened, right? Outside in feedback, maybe you got a bug report, maybe you're evaluating adding an adjacent feature, but you can use that as a good opportunity to go back and review the intent and the code that you wrote. All right. So let's dig in a little bit more into how you might do an intent review and what it feels like. So why do we do intent reviews? So we mentioned the workflow. It ends up mostly creating alignment and shared mental models. The intent review, again, can happen sort of anywhere in the implementation workflow. We often do it optimistically. So we'll do an intent review and start implementing at the same time. And it has a lot of benefits compared to doing line-by-line code review. The biggest of which is that it can match the pace of AI code gen, right? Like you can get your AI agents to produce thousands of lines of code in an hour or two. And if you were going to do line-by-line code review of a few thousand lines of code, it would take way more than an hour or two if you're doing it methodically. And so intent review is much more aligned with the pace that we move at. And it also catches a lot of the problems because if you're doing a good job creating design docs as you go to feed context to the agents, they also contain enough context for another human to understand what it is that you're attempting to do. And that seems like a great place for shared mental models.
Got a comment, not necessarily a question, but someone said, love the minimal flow. This interactive discovery very often leads to surprising ideas and approaches.
Yeah, for sure, right? That is one of the other nice things about AI code gen in general, right? Is that we can explore more than we might have in the past, right? Like decisions felt like they got progressively more expensive the further in the process that they happened, but it's not as true anymore, right? Like you have a lot of flexibility to explore these days. Okay, so what do we do when we do intent reviews? So it typically focuses around a design doc, and we're reading them top to bottom in the same way that I would argue that you should be reading design docs even as an individual dev that you're using to feed your agents. This is the place where you have the highest leverage. This is essentially the work of software definition and development these days, is to make sure that essentially the context you're providing to the agents and the prompts that you're creating based off of these design docs are accurate. And so, as trivial as it sounds, you should read the design docs that you're generating and then producing software off of top to bottom. And if anything in there doesn't make sense, you should be spending time either manually editing them or poking and prodding the agent to edit your design doc till you're happy with it. And then when you're happy with it, you share with teammates who should do the same. They should read them top to bottom as if they were human written documents. And sometimes we find ourselves getting into this flow where it's so cheap to create content, including design documents, that we skim them. And I think that actually leads to bad outcomes and untenable workflows and behaviors. And so when we think about it consciously, what we try to do is treat design documents as if they have actual meaning, that they're not just a flash of text that's meant to be used to prompt an agent. And that's what allows us to start to align and build mental models. And then as we're looking through those design docs, we're looking for things like priority and sequencing, key decisions, risks, and trade-offs. These are the major things that often come up. But if I were going to look at it at the highest level, the main question we're looking for is, does this design doc lay out the actual intent that we have for the new feature that we're building? That's the number one thing we're looking for. We'll take a quick look at some of our design documents and then some of the tools that we use for reviewing those design documents. So first I'll start with some real world design docs just to give a sense for what we're doing. Okay, so this is the real world.
Can you zoom in maybe one more thing?
Didn't quite get there. How about that?
All right.
There we go.
Perfect.
Yeah. So this is a design doc for a feature I was working on this morning. It's still in progress. And importantly, I've prompted to generate it. But I've also gone through, I don't know, probably a dozen turns of the crank to get this to actually be what I want it to say, right? So examples include, it's tough to give context here. There's a lot of context to this, but essentially we're trying to do an authorship feature and the new product that we're building. What it should look like is similar to Google Docs. When you go back in version history, you can see who authored each span of text in a given version. We want to implement the same thing in a feature that we're building out. And so, there's a lot that went into loading up the context for this, pointing the agent at the right parts of the code base, giving it examples from research that I've done about the specific libraries that we're using, pointing it to Google Docs and the feature there that we're trying to recreate. And then I turned the crank. I read it top to bottom, right? And then turn the crank a dozen times or so to get it to the point where we wanted. If I were going to critique it, actually, the biggest thing that I didn't do that I normally do is pull a lot of the implementation details out. So specifically, like code blocks are a bad smell to me for a design document. I prefer to let a clean context agent take a design doc and do the implementation as opposed to having code in the design doc. But other than that, I was pretty happy with it. I got it to a point where I wanted it.
Couple comment or question. Someone's commenting on your organization. The date and the file name is very nice. I always have a hard time reconstructing history. So the dates that you see on the left, people are liking that. You mentioned a couple things. You mentioned doing several iterations of this. You mentioned putting some information in about like dependencies and libraries that you researched. So like what does the research look like? How much detail do you look into what dependencies versus let AI recommend what dependencies to accept. So like, what's your research and like, how deep do you go when you're editing this and researching yourself versus trusting the agent?
Yeah. Um, I usually take a multi-agent approach to trusting the agent. So that's my MO. And it comes down to a couple of things. One, just learned experience, and then two, practicality, right? So if there's something fairly meaty that I'm working on, like this is a pretty big one. Um, Sometimes I'll be thinking about it while I'm here in front of the computer. Sometimes I won't be in front of the computer, and that will force me to end up using um, a bespoke LLM. Like I'll just use Claude Mobile or ChatGPT Mobile directly. And so, in some sense, it's because of circumstance, but in some sense, it works really nicely to completely get out of your code base and start doing research and questions and trying to build up a mental model for something that has nothing to do with your code base, right? Like it's kind of nice to have to describe a problem from scratch. So some of my research is completely outside of any of the traditional agents. And then a lot of the research is inside the code base with Claude Code in this case. And here, it's about context loading first, right? So before I even write this document, actually, let me see if I can pull up the um, the chat history here. It's gonna be this one probably here. Oh, let's mark some. Let's be close enough. Let's see here. This one might do it. Yeah, here we go. Right, so let me zoom a bunch. So first loading up contexts. Usually it looks something like explain what happens in the current as implemented or as built software, right? So that's like getting the code base into context and priming it up, but focus in a focused way. And then after I ask it my question, I'll end up maybe refining some of my question. Let's see, where do I end up getting to? So explain intent web comment storage, document change marking. Okay, so this is a lot of context loading. Here we go, right? So 5 prompts of context loading before I jumped into my 6th prompt, which is let's write a new design doc for us to capture and display provenance for file estimate directly in intent arenas. So this is what my process looks like. And even before this, in this particular case, there was probably some good research that I was doing offline, not really offline, but outside the context of my code base around CRDTs, which is just a technology for handling file edits. It's similar to what Google Docs uses, so it was relevant outside research in this case. And then it all ends up coming together. So it's a long-winded answer, but I usually use multiple agents, some in the context of my code base, some outside the context of my code base in order to generate a design doc. And then after that, I keep going, right? Like that's the initial prompt to generate the design doc, but then I go further. So for this particular design doc, it had actually laid out. So I'm calling out like problems I'm noticing in the design doc. It calls out. There was a piece of text in the design doc that said position tracking burden. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, why do you think we now have position tracking burden, right? So this is what it sort of looks like to go back and forth with the agent around the design doc. And then by point 11 or by prompt 11, I had a design doc, but it had like 7 different approaches. Like it had done this sort of, you could do anything, and here are the 7 different ways, and here are the trade-offs and pros and cons. And so by prompt 12, it's where I said, nope, like honed in on approach 7. Let's make that a standalone design document. And that I think is ultimately the design document that we're looking at here.
Great. So, a couple of questions that people have asked me related to this, so they might be curious about your answer too. Do you use anything like Gemini Deep Research for things? And the second kind of related, maybe unrelated question is, in your thing as you're scrolling, you're talking about auto merge, which I think may be a library, and you
It
talk
is a
about
library.
CRDT, which is another technical term that has a specific meaning.
Yep.
That's implementation. So how do you like how much do you feel like you need to understand those when you're writing a spec? Do you need to like, oh, auto merge, it's for merging stuff and that's enough? Or is it like CRDT, like this is the high level, like you have a paragraph of understanding, or like how deep do you go in understanding this before you feel comfortable with it in your spec?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, the answer is it depends. But the feature that we're talking about here and those two specifics, auto merge and CRDTs, are one, they're fairly foundational to what we're building, like the next product that we're building, and two, fairly complex, right? And so that has been a team sport. Like we started with a um, less in-depth understanding of either of those things. They both came out of research that Greg actually did first. Like he was the trailblazer and was just learning um, about document versioning and how you can have real-time versioning without having to deal with merge conflicts, right? So that was a very like uh, uh, purpose-driven exploration rather than technology package or library-driven exploration. And then as we used and incorporated those two pieces of technology into our product, we refined our learning more and more, including deep research at times. So there is at one point, I did a long deep research session in order to generate a primer on CRDTs and auto merge so that we could all be on the same page about the core and underlying technology that we had come to depend on. So it didn't start this way. We didn't start in depth, like prompting about auto merge and CRDTs. We didn't even know they existed. Um, but once we discovered them and once we started using them, we realized that they were a topic in and of themselves that we needed to build our knowledge of. Let's see. So rolling back a little bit of like we
Oh,
dove
sorry.
straight in to oh, go ahead. Was there another question?
Oh yeah, there's one question from Mitcha. Why do you prefer to keep the code out? I think that's out of the spec. Do the implementation models work better this way?
Yeah. I have one main reason. There might be other reasons that happen, but keeping code out of the spec means that if I write the spec and then 2 days later I go to implement the spec, and in the meantime, um, Sean and Greg have built three new features, the implementing the spec can be independent of the then true version of the code base, right? I want to work off the latest and freshest code always. We just
Question.
move too fast sometimes.
Yeah,
The code changes a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe you're right, less confusion. Yeah? So maybe links too much to the code as it sees and then makes mistakes. Yeah, correct. Yeah, cool. Haven't bothered pulling it out, but will do certainly in the future.
Yeah, I found myself, okay, so first I found myself thinking, hey,
Mm,
this is great. It's going into details. And then I
mm,
found myself realizing, oh, I'm not reading those details and I don't know if they're accurate. And then I
mm,
found a real world example where it implemented based on code in the spec that did not align with code in our code base at that moment in time. And I was like, this is just it's more of a liability than an asset. And I just
mm.
pull it out now.
Cool. Yeah, I will do it. Thanks.
The
Mm,
easiest high level uh,
mm.
is if you're not going to read it, it shouldn't be in the spec. Like if
That's
as a
good.
human you're not going to read it, then get it out of
Mm,
there, right?
mm,
Um,
mhm.
yeah. So
Cool.
continuing
Mm,
on, then let's see. We
great.
dove into
Thanks.
some. Yes,
Mm.
yes. We dove into a pretty heady, full-on real-world spec, and it's disconnected a bit from what we might be doing day to day. So I've also created a a simple example one that we can use, and it's going to be the opposite extreme. Of course, it's going to feel very trivial, but it at least gets across the concept and how we do it, right? So this was an empty project. and then I set up a vanilla Next.js app to start. And the goal was to create a simple static blog generator. And so for this, before there was any code, before there's anything in here, I just wanted it to create a spec, a design document. And so that's what we see here with design.md. Let me zoom in again a little bit more. See what we can get up here. It's too much, maybe right there. Okay, so I did it the quick and dirty way, right? I mean, started with a one-shot prompt and said, okay, create a design doc for a simple static blog generator in Python, and here's what it should do. Read Markdown files and convert them to HTML. This will work to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how well understood the problem is, right? Given that there are a million static blog generators in the world, the Claude Code's going to do a pretty decent job of creating a design doc off of this. If I were doing something much more complex, yes, I would have first done some writing of my own, some deep research. I would have probably used Claude Desktop and ChatGPT Desktop and, sort of researched static blogs. But for the purposes of this, I did that one-shot prompt, and then I read it, right? I read what it output, and I realized like it was generating a bunch of blog files, like that it was proposing a system that would generate a bunch of blog files from Markdown files. But I was like, well, is there a home page? Like, will it have an index page? And it's like, oh yeah, good catch, it should. So let me add in the index page. Right, and I went through and it updated the design doc based off of that. And I was like, well, how will we know who wrote each post? And I was like, oh, good point. Yep, you should add in an author. And of course, like I can make these edits directly to the document, but why not let it do it? This way I can know that it caught all the places where it was referencing author. And then I said, let's have a little bit of styling. No need to go over the top. Make use of 𝗏𝗏, which you already have installed. And it caught something wrong in my thinking, right? So I had set this up as a Next.js app using 𝗏𝗏 and Next.js. And then I told it to create a static blog generator. And it's kind of like, hey, 𝗏𝗏 is a React-based, like server-based application framework, and you told me to generate a static blog. So, okay, we can use styling, like we can use the Tailwind styling, but it doesn't really make sense to use 𝗏𝗏. So that was a good catch on its part. And it also corrected my mental model, which was really good. Okay, so here, I mean, we're pretty much there. I think I told it one more thing. I know that for me personally, when I use Python, I like to use UV, thanks to Isaac's introduction to it. And so I told it to do that. It revised the design doc one more time. And I'm at a point where if it were a real feature that I were implementing at SpecStory, I would take this design doc, I would share it with my teammates, and at the same time, I would start Claude on an implementation path. So then what would I expect from my teammates when I shared this document with them? Let's come back into presentation a little bit, and then we can also look at some tooling and some real world expectations here. So I share my design doc, and I kind of expect my teammates to go through and review it for these purposes. But as an author, it's kind of important for me, we've learned, to do some things that, again, may not seem natural from the past, but are important now. So in the past, when we wrote documents by hand, there was no question about the level of authorship, right? It's like there's some given that we can have collaborating as people, right? Greg and I, or Sean and I could share a doc with Greg, and he would know if it was 2 years ago that I wrote the doc. And so anything that's in there must intentionally be in there. But today, if I've written a doc, I could have one-shotted it with a single prompt. I could have iterated on it with an agent for 12 prompts. I could have written it by hand, and there's no way for Greg to know that unless I tell him. So one of the things that we do as authors of design documents when sharing them with teammates and asking them for feedback is let them know how much we've put into it. Like, this is an AI authored first draft, in which case, yeah, I just want to like spitball some ideas with you. I haven't even reviewed it deeply yet, so take it with a grain of salt. Versus, nope, it's AI authored, but I've completely reviewed it and I've made multiple edits to it. Therefore, I think what's in it is correct. and now I want your feedback on what I think is correct and what I'm proposing. This is very different. And again, you can't assume anymore what the level of authorship is. So we just have to communicate that explicitly. And
I
then
think
stats. Yeah.
I think this helps a lot. Even, I mean, I think it used to happen some even with traditional code. It's just more so where, you read some code or you read some implementation and you're like, I don't really see why we did it this way. And then you kind of like keep reading to figure out like why was it designed this way? It doesn't really make sense. And then you spend like an hour digging at it, and then you go ask someone like, "Oh, that was just the first thing that came up. I didn't think of anything else." And you're like, "Oh, well, why did I just spend all this time trying to like back into some thought process?" So yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, we're pattern matchers, right? Humans really want to find meaning. And so again, when it was a human creating all of the content, whether it be documents or code, that worked well. But when you try and create meaning when there was no intent, then it's a like a maze, right? It's a rat's maze. So indicate authorship level, and then of course, you know, we've done this for a while when we're working well. Indicate the status, like what do you want from your reviewer? Like, is this something again that you're proposing and you want feedback as if this is a final proposal, or is this something that's got two approaches that you're struggling between, or just an initial set of ideas? So these two are pretty important. And then provide the AI chat history. So if you've authored a design document using AI, no better way to let people understand the level of thinking that you've put into that document than sharing that AI chat history. And you saw that, and so this is one of the plugs. But if you're using SpecStory while you're using one of your coding agents, you can directly share any one of your chat histories with your teammates, and they'll be able to look through and understand step by step what you did to create a given design doc or even a chunk of code. So that's one set. And then we'll get on to demo review in a second, but let's take a look at what the side-by-side UI could look like for reviewing a document and the chat behind it. So far we've seen both here, right? So when I'm working locally and I'm creating, in this case, a design document for a static blog generator, I can see the document here. And because I happen to have just done it, I see my chat context here. But then when I share this document with my colleagues, all this is usually lost. So one of the big things that we're working on is a UI for bringing those two things together directly. So for example,
There's a quick question.
oh yeah,
Your slide to indicate authorship level resonated with some people, and they're wondering if they can share a screenshot and tag you on social media.
oh, of course, yeah. Let me get it big, and then we'll leave these slides behind too. Let me go back one. So there we go.
Got it? Okay.
All right.
Yeah. If you don't, we'll drop them somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the tools that we're working on as we speak is a tool to bring that same pattern to shared documents. So of course, nothing works when you want it to. Let me see if I killed something. Try one more time. There we go. So this is the new tool that we're creating at SpecStory called Arena. And it's essentially a way to reproduce that view that you were looking at when you happen to be working in the moment locally, but in a shareable fashion. So you can grab a URL and just give it to a teammate or refer to it yourself after your local work is long gone. And it just lets you review a given document, including code files, side by side with the chat transcript that created them. So in this case, you can see the same thing, create a design document for a simple static blog generator. That obviously created the bulk of this document. But then when I followed up and asked, will it have an index page? You can see it added in the lines about index.html and an index generator. And then similarly, as I kept going, how will we know who wrote each post? you can see highlighted the author front matter and the reference to author in the output. And I can even go in the other direction, right? Like so, this section here in the document, when I click into it, UV run generate came from me asking Claude, hey, in Python, I usually use UV for dependency management, and it inserted that into the document. So this is one of the things that we're working on to make it easier. But even before having this, we do just what I said, which is share the document that we want reviewed, indicate level of authorship, give some sense of how many turns of the crank we've put into it, and share our SpecStory histories, which are available today. Plug over. We're looking for design partners, though. So if any of that looks interesting, we're happy to hook people up with free usage of that Arena tool. So continuing on, okay, we talked about intent reviews, which obviously is the bulk of the sort of new approach to the process that we use. But let me not skip over other parts of the workflow or process that we do. Much of them rooted in tradition. So not a lot new here, except we use them pretty aggressively. So demo reviews in sort of, I'll call it a traditional agile methodology where you might be working in 2-week sprints. A big part of any given sprint is demo day. And there's a lot of value to that. I think the only thing we don't love about the demo day approach is it's too infrequent. It's tied to time instead of to things being ready for review. So we like a much more in-process approach. When you've got something to demo, just demo it. And then also, because we're a fully distributed team, we make heavy use of asynchronous demos. And so what does that look like? 2 forms that demos can often take. One, working prototype. So one of the nice things about AI code gen and agents like Cursor and Claude Code is they let more people into the mix of the code base. And so people who might have been in a more traditional product management role or product design role who felt sort of locked out of the Git repo should no longer feel that way. And you can tell Claude Code to do anything you want it to do in order to get a code base down on your computer and get your local laptop set up to run it. So everybody should be running the code. And a working prototype could be as simple as, sharing a branch or sharing instructions for how to run that working prototype. So we like this a lot. Like everybody being able to see and interact with the demo themselves as opposed to just watching it on a screen or a shared video that's the gold standard for sharing a demo with teammates. And then
I have a question for that.
Yeah.
Just a short question. I also like that you can basically just do this prototyping, but I struggle a bit with this pixel perfect stuff. Yeah, so or not even pixel perfect, but then you just go down a rabbit hole of repeatedly changing and iterating. How do you fix this challenge?
Yeah, I'll give you the honest answer. So there's two or three honest answers. One, sometimes we don't care. Like we try to get pixel perfect when it matters, and we try not to be pixel perfect when it doesn't, because it can be a rabbit hole and it wastes a lot of time. 2, we use a lot of existing libraries and examples. Like we'll feed agents heavily with examples of things we like, whether they are screenshots or, in a better case, like grabbing an entire design system or library that's already out there and using that to guide the agent. And then 3, and this is the real answer, we have a great designer. We actually went through 3 different designers until we found one who is comfortable with code and design. And so he does design in code. We're never looking at Figmas or like old school mockups. We're always looking at live code mockups. But behind the scenes, he's using both Figma and also a bunch of AI code gen to get things pixel perfect. And so that's been a huge unlock.
That's huge, really. I think really you have to know these funny classes of Tailwind, for example, to be able to fix stuff. And I don't. So I think you are completely right.
Yeah, so short of finding the unicorn, like we found, which by the way, the other tip there, it was somebody really young, somebody who still in college. He's great, and he's doing both design and computer science. It's a magic combination. But short of that, yeah, lots of examples, feeding examples to the agent of what exactly we want, screenshots and existing libraries.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Yep.
There's also a comment, also by Mitcha in Discord. I think this is on the Arena app. Looks like it's a great app for error analysis too. Even simply looking back at my chat history to get better at prompting. Would love to be an alpha tester.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
happy.
also me.
Yep.
So-
Yeah.
Cool.
Send an email afterwards, or I'll find you afterwards through
cool.
through Isaac, and we'll get connected up.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
offers
cool.
open to anybody as well.
Mhm.
Great. Okay, so we've got a demo that we're reviewing. Ideally, it's a demo that we can review by actually playing with it ourselves, not just watching a video or screenshots. And what are we looking for? I mean, it depends, again, on what the author intends, like what stage are they at and what feedback do they want. I have a tendency to break things a lot. It's what's made me a good product manager. Sometimes I give Greg, my co-founder, feedback about everything that's broken, when really what he wants is to understand whether the overarching user experience makes sense. So just getting aligned on what's most helpful is, of course, important. And then methodically going through and trying to give that feedback. That feedback then, of course, loops back in. You might use it to drive a change to a design doc or the creation of a new design doc, which might then go through an implementation flow of its own. And then last but not least, this has been in sort of relative priority for us, code reviews. And so, yes, there are still many cases where code reviews matter a lot. Here's how our CTO Sean thinks about code reviews and has codified this into an actual Claude command /command that we use when we're doing work that justifies or that requires line-by-line code reviews, right? So when you're doing line-by-line code reviews, like, can you articulate why each line of code exists? Should it exist? Not just like, what does it do, but why is it there and is it needed? And if you're going to give comments back, usually the comments that you want are why. So yes, how is important, but we often find that most of the issues come from a misunderstanding of intent or requirements. And so we lean towards that. And then finally, test verification, but not just verifying the tests pass. With AI agents, we found that you have to be pretty thoughtful about making sure that tests fail, because they have a tendency to produce tests that always pass. And so we're pretty intentional about inversion, meaning we'll force break our code and make sure that the tests fail. What do we do to achieve some of this? In addition to having a pull request that somebody reviews line by line, one, we use the agent's built-in reviewers. So if you don't know this, these are gold. Claude Code has a built-in /command called /security review. You just run it for the set of changes that you have that are different than what's currently committed and pushed, and it'll go through and it'll look for patterns of poor security. So that's a helpful one. Cursor has a bug bot that some of our users have told us about. They swear by it. We don't use Cursor all that much anymore, so we haven't been using bug bot, but all the tools have some form of built-in reviewers, and they're worth running. And then in addition, you can create your own reviewer. Let's see. So maybe I'll just show a quick example. And this is inside of the SpecFlow repository, so you can get to it as well after this meeting. But inside SpecFlow templates, we have review templates. And in this case, they're Claude commands for doing a code review, meaning your own change that you're about to commit, or a PR review, which is pull request that somebody else in your team sent you. They're /commands. If you haven't set up /commands before, it's just natural language description of what you want it to do. So it can offer a pretty good starting point. And what it looks like when you run a slash command like this is, yeah, here we are. So this is an example of me actually implementing that static site generator that I was talking about, right? I told Claude Code, okay, great, you made the design doc, now go implement it. And then afterwards, if you're running Claude Code, it's as easy as running the built-in /security review command, and you'll get output that looks something like this. That'll go through and tell you in its security analysis where it thinks there are problems, right? So that's helpful. And then the template that I just shared with you is the one that lets you do a line-by-line code review of the pending changes that you have not yet committed. And so that's the one with that template inside of SpecFlow. And when you run it, it'll literally go through and do a line-by-line of all of the meaningful files that changed. So it tries to skip a bunch of things. Hopefully just be skipping the markdown and stuff like that. But again, you typically would want this up side by side with the file that it's talking about. So here's generate.py, lines 1 through 2. Okay, good. Oh, okay, line 4 through 9, it noticed an OS import, but it's never used, so that should be removed. Same thing with line 11 and 12, relative paths, right? Could work, but if you move this anywhere else, right? So this type of review can be helpful in catching problems. Again, the way we've crafted our slash command is to be much more about the why, the intent. You can see even the feedback is about where you might have functional issues as a result of the code, as opposed to styling or other problems. But this is one of the ways that we do code reviews. When we do them, we automate them as much as possible. And then the final piece of this, because I know we're coming up on time, is aggressive linting. You've probably experienced it, but you know when using the agents, they do a really good job usually of running linters when they exist and are defined. And so we lean into that and we end up creating linting configurations that might go even above and beyond standard linting. Like for the Swift app that we were building, the Mac desktop app, we put in file length and function body length limits so that if a file gets beyond 900 lines, it'll warn. If it gets beyond 1,000 lines, it'll error. And so the agent runs the linter, and we know, wow, that's created a really long file. I don't necessarily read all the lines of code in that file, but I know if my file gets too long, my agent's going to have a hard time processing it. So that's one of the linting rules we use. I think we're kind of at time, but I'm just sort of recapping. I think that the key takeaways are mostly to use the right review at the right time. And with AI code gen, it's a impedance mismatch to do line-by-line code reviews if you're not doing line-by-line code writing. And so we just have to find other mechanisms. And one of the biggest ones that we lean into is the intent review. It just requires you to be intentional about intent and not treat design documents as if they're just for the agents. They're for you as well. You need to read them top to bottom. And when you share them with friends, you need to be kind and thoughtful about their time. That's what I got here, but I'm happy to stick around for more questions and discussion.
Yeah, I got a couple of comments here. Someone said, really enjoying this, overwhelmed to a degree, but that is a good sign. So the recording and slides are going to be available after. This is a lot of information. It was really great. So please reference the slides, try implementing pieces with this. You can rewatch the video, the community, Discord community, that's what it's for, so that you can ask questions and, over time, because yeah, I wouldn't expect anyone to like 100% internalize everything over this hour immediately. Take some time. So go ahead and do that. Oh, Mitch put in his contact info in the Discord for that. So I'll hand that over. And yeah, check out the general channel as well. Someone is saying shout out to the community. If there's any interest in an informal after hours talk about the course, answer questions just like among students, We got someone open to hosting. So if that's something that people might be interested in getting together and talking about the lectures or the spec story or whatever, please respond to that there. I think that'd be really cool.
Great.
All right. Well, this was great. Any last minute questions? If so, go ahead and unmute. Otherwise, we're going to end it because we are over time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, really. I'm just in the process of registering an account already. That's
Great.
SpecStory. Cool. Yeah, that
Always open to feedback.
Yeah, that's really cool, this arena stuff. And I had SpecStory already on my to-do list to register, but I haven't done it until now. Now I do it. Thanks
great.
for this cool presentation.
I think it's a really cool tool, SpecStory. I mean, both SpecFlow and SpecStory, just installed SpecStory, and curious to see sort of what we're able to do, with our history. And I think that could be really useful. I guess the one thing, for our team, and there's two other members of my team here, we build open source tooling for finance ministries related to sovereign debt. And so some of our projects are software projects that clearly have specs like this, and some of them are research projects. And so we're trying to sort of generalize the SpecFlow thing for building, for projects that aren't necessarily software related as well.
Yeah, that's
but
one
really
that's
liked it as
fascinating use case. Two, though, I would imagine you're using agents for document writing in addition to code writing. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So provenance matters as much there, maybe even more, right, than on the code side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that's something that we're trying to tackle. And so I honestly think that it'll be really useful for us in a bunch of ways. So we may be interested in doing the alpha testing as well. So.
Amazing. Yeah, happy to get you set up. I mean, especially on the open source side. So yeah, we'll get connected up.
Sign-up page is slow at the moment.
What?
Maybe very busy.
Which
or
sign-up page did you go to?
So cloud.specstory.com auth, I think is the link.
You just weren't able to. You're having problems here. It's clerk being bad.
But I can try later.
All 15 of us went there at the same time and crashed
Yeah.
it. So
Hopefully
much
that didn't crash it.
Auth is always funny.
15.
But, yeah, I don't know. It's also maybe my browser and then my computer totally overwhelmed.
Let me know if you still can't get in after.
I try it
a little bit.
later on. Okay.
Great. And if while you're waiting for that, anybody who does want to sign up for that for the alpha, if you end up at specstory.com, you should get a little pop-up here ready to go beyond just capture. This will bring you into the design partnership for early access. Or you could just go straight to it, intent.build. Great. All right. I promised I wouldn't overplug. I'm going to stop.